some privilege in speaking on behalf of the board in this matter, and if anyone thinks I'm wrong on this, feel free to say I'm wrong. But we are strongly committed to making sure we are the most competitive, best school division on the planet. And I'll leave it at that. I will start, I think, was someone have their hand up? Anybody want to go first, or if we're good with what we spoke about last week? Any thoughts, Miss Jessie?
Good evening. Okay, am I closer to the mic? Sorry about that. I wanted to just share a couple of thoughts, and it's not because of the audience here tonight, but because of my own experience. When I think of my personal experience, it had nothing to do with whether or not my parents, whether we were hard workers. It was because I needed someone to support me. And therefore, I dropped into Northwestern University from an all-black school. And I had to work my way through that, and I had to have support. And I had some friends, and those friends were Mort Zimmerman and his wife, who took me in and helped me. And I think when you look at equity, you're looking at kids like me at that time and in our schools that need support. And I think also I will speak for Ms. Ralston, because Ms. Ralston asked the question, what does equity mean? And does everybody understand it? And listening to the audience tonight and listening to other people who have spoken, I would ask this committee to at least come up with a statement of what equity really means, because I think there's a misinterpretation of it. As a principal at Vaughn Elementary for 20 years, I had a low-income school, and I had this thing called Catch the Wave, and Dr. Waltz knows that everybody in that school had to move at a fast pace. When white kids, black kids, kids who were low income, kids who had no parents to help them, when they saw everybody moving, everybody moved. So when I look at equity, I look at it as something when I look at equity, I look at accelerate, don't remediate. You move fast, you move quickly. And when you look at equity, you're looking at access to dual enrollment, access to advanced placement, access to specialty programs and career readiness. And so tonight I brought, because I thought there would be some concerns about it, I brought this Navigating the Equity. If you can go to VDOE, and it's called Navigating the Equity, and you can see the data, because equity has to be data-driven. When we look at disparities, when we look at disproportionalities, we need to close those gaps. And so for me, it's about closing the gaps. One of the things that I would ask the committee also, if it's possible, when I looked at resources, and I looked at a lot of other equity statements for tonight, I don't see facilities. And there has been a lack of equity in facilities. Woodbridge High School, for example, 45 years. I worked hard to get a gym there, to get a field there, and there is some inequities that we need to look at. In terms of race, I don't know if you call it systematic racism. I'm not sure that's what the whole equity is about, but it's about bringing people together and access to the same opportunities. Do all kids have the same opportunities? Some of them do, some of them do not. Is it systematic? No, it's not. But it's something that we really need to work on. And it's about academic rigor, underrepresentation, and I think that in educating the community, maybe we should do more to educate the community, because I think that when people look at just a statement, then they don't understand that we're not talking about lowering the standards. You never lower the standards. You move faster and you move higher. So that's what I want to say on that. And my question is, how do we operationalize this? And maybe somebody from that committee could address that. What's the next step in this process? And perhaps this is not the night to discuss it, because we're here just to talk about the statement, but I understand why some parents are concerned, because it's like all of a sudden you saw a statement and you didn't understand where it was coming from or whether or not your kids were going to be pulled back. Okay, I'm sorry, ma'am, but ma'am, I can't.
Yes.
No.
We need order because right now it is Ms. Jessie's turn to.
I'm not just talking to
It's-
you guys in this audience. I'm talking to,
I understand. So it is. So we need a point of order. Miss Jessie is talking. It is her. It is board
ma'am,
matters.
ma'am, I am
We have
talking.
had.
Please. Every kid I've ever had, and most of the principals that I know, have always wanted every child to move. But there are some things that we can do better to increase the number.
Define equity. What is it? What are we arguing about?
Please.
You said you didn't have a definition.
Yeah.
What
Can we
is-
have a point of order? This is Miss Jessie's turn to talk.
I'm
We have had
asking-
public
I'm
comment.
asking,
What are we talking about?
well, see, equity means, when you look through the lens, it means different things to different people, and I'm sorry that I'm addressing you because I'm not supposed to. But I will ask the committee to define equity and put that for you. I think you deserve that. Does that make sense? Thank you. And with that, I think I've ended, but there's some, I think we've got some gaps in our communication. And I think if the committee could, who are the people on the committee? Are they here?
They're not here tonight, Miss Jessie.
Okay, I thought some people would be here. But I do think I would like to chat with them about the statement, more information for parents so they understand that we're talking about acceleration, not just remediation, and not holding kids back. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Jessie. Ms. Wall, did you want to speak? All right.
Thank you, Ms. Zarapur. I have a question. I want to raise some of the concerns that we heard from citizens tonight regarding training and curriculum and how that will relate to transparency and accountability. So my question, and I don't know who exactly wants to answer it, but is this: what kinds of changes in curriculum and teaching practices are we going to be making? This goes along with what Ms. Jessie was asking about. Parents will want to know, like, what are we going to do with this? What is our next step? So can you tell us what kinds of materials will be used in our training to examine beliefs and biases? What methods will be used? For instance, are we going to be using critical race theory that has been mentioned tonight to accomplish that training? Are we going to be using the book White Fragility by D'Angelo or How to Be Anti-Racist by Kendi? Should I just ask my questions and then you can kind of answer them all in a lump?
Well,
Or should we stop right there?
good evening first to
Okay.
Dr. Latif and Ms. Zagarpour and members of the board, Dr. Waltz. As was stated at the last meeting when this statement was introduced, this is the first step. The actualization of it, the operational piece of it, is not on the agenda tonight and will be looked at as you have a new superintendent coming into the school division. This is the starting point. And Dr. McDade was a part of the discussion on moving this forward prior to her arrival. So the questions you're asking are not the questions that are prepared to be answered at this point.
Understood. Will the
So just so you know, folks, we have a school board meeting, and we don't typically have audience participation outside of citizen comment time. I would ask the audience to please refrain from comments, hooting, hollering, and if there is any further, I'll ask our security to escort you out of the building. It's just the proper decorum for the meeting. Thank you.
Can I ask a? Yes. Okay. So I guess my follow-up question then would be, I understand maybe that we don't know the specific answers to that, but I'll be looking forward to knowing them when we do. Will the public have the opportunity to view training materials and or the training itself, so they can see what teachers are being trained to teach, and so that, and I suppose at some point when curriculum is revised or changed, will the public be able to know what changes are coming to the curriculum and have a chance to review that. So what I'm looking for is, what kind of transparency are we going to have? What kind of accountability are we going to have? And if we have an outside contractor, do we have an outside contractor that will be doing this training for our teachers? And if so, who is that? And can we review their training materials? Can parents have access to that so that they can see what's being taught?
Mr. Iman?
Hello again.
Yep.
I don't want to sound like a broken record, but that again is a discussion that really is the next step with the new superintendent when the new superintendent arrives. But we have transparency in all our curriculum. We've always had that. We'll continue to have transparency. We do follow Virginia Department of Education guidelines, and we will continue to do the same. But the next steps are to be defined going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Iman. Are you done? One sec.
Agenda?
All right, I'm checking. Why don't you wrap them up? I'm going to let her wrap up, and then we'll go to Ms. Williams.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one of the other concerns that I have heard and I'm sensitive to is the concern about lower standards. In point 4, I think it's bullet 4, we talk about systemic racism and overt discrimination. And I do want to know, I've always thought really highly of Prince William County Schools. I think we do a really great job, actually, at least from my perspective as a longtime consumer of Prince William education. So could we be more specific about what we're talking about? We're assuming that we have racist or systemic discrimination and racism in our schools and our institutions, not just in, maybe teachers or students on student or teacher on student or vice versa. But what are we looking at when we talk about instructional beliefs and systems that we are going to be undoing? Are we talking about like doing away with grades? Are we talking about testing? Are we talking about course offerings? Are we talking about security personnel and not having security personnel in the schools? Discipline? Are we talking about discipline? I think that I think parents are concerned when we talk about what are we doing away with, what are we dismantling. We should probably be a lot more transparent about that. Can anybody speak to that?
Mr. Iman.
I'll continue with my comments from earlier in that much of this discussion, while good, needs to take place once the statement is in place and the discussions are taken with the new superintendent and the administrative direction that's coming.
Understood. Ms. Wall.
All right. So I also have heard concerns from the community about the effect on our professional working environment that might come about because of the training that we are going to be doing and perhaps changes in our hiring practices. So my question is, first of all, what does it look like in practice to assure that staff members examine beliefs, explicit and implicit biases? Do we mandate self-evaluation? Are we going to sit employees down with their colleagues in a professional development setting and ask them to expose their beliefs and biases in a public setting? Are we going to allow them to be quiet or else opt out of that kind of expression? What will happen to those who share less popular viewpoints? Will they be retaliated against? Will they be in jeopardy of losing their standing in their school, or would we create a hostile work environment? I'm concerned about this kind of practice. How are we going to do that and still protect our teachers from a hostile work environment?
Dr. Waltz, Mr. Iman.
Yes. The questions are all operational in nature, be it regardless of instruction, professional development, human resources. They're all operational questions. And again, with all due respect, the board is presented with a statement to guide those discussions going forward. That the discussion on the operationalizing of these is not the topic that is presented this evening for the board for action.
Okay.
I have one more.
One more.
One more question. All right. So parents are concerned about where this is going. And maybe I understand, I've tried to frame this as a policy question, but they worry that changes in our curriculum are going to lead to controversial ideas or politics entering our schools. And so the question is, if our students, I guess this is an operational question, I'm sorry, but if our students object to what they're being taught, or if they feel uncomfortable, or if they feel like their freedom of thought or conscience or speech is being threatened, what are we going to do about that? How are we going to ensure that our students don't feel threatened because of maybe the difficult conversations that some of this might bring up?
As you know, we do not put our students in situations like that as a matter of practice now, and that's not going to change going forward. What I would say, any more specific response that you need, again, is going to have to come as a follow-up.
Okay. Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am unabashedly probably the most in favor of this equity statement. What it's doing is codifying things that are already in existence and adding to them. We now train our teachers with culturally responsive training, not new. We now try to do our best to provide all the resources necessary for students. Right now, the majority of this statement is now being written, becoming a policy for things that are already occurring in our school division. This is enhancing and putting it down on paper and making it real. This is not about critical race theory. This is not just about being Black or being white. This is not about that. This is about all of those isms. These are about the students who are high performing and don't get their needs met, because we don't offer those classes to help them once they've advanced out of our system. This is about the students who are at the bottom of that same spectrum and aren't getting the resources that they need. There's no promise to them other than what's legally binding at federal and state levels. We can do better than that. We should be doing better than that for every single student. Equality does not do that. Equity does do that. You don't have to agree. We don't have to believe in the same set of things. That's what makes everything great. What we do agree on is making sure that every single student has the opportunity to succeed. When you don't share the same set of beliefs, that impacts your student outcome. Absolutely impacts your student outcome. Can't guarantee that everyone is going to, there's no guarantee that everyone is going to have the same outcome. It's not how it works anywhere. What you can do is give them the opportunity so that they have the opportunity to do that. That doesn't happen. I'm perfectly fine with people who don't believe in systemic racism, who don't believe in white privilege. That's fine. You don't have to. This is not a forced issue. We're not forcing you to change your personal beliefs. What we are is a public school system. It is our obligation. Students now across the board don't have the same opportunities, period. And if you don't think the system is racist, if you don't think that teachers' beliefs or counselors' beliefs or individual beliefs get in the way of providing opportunities, I am more than happy to spend a lot of time giving you a lot of examples about how that actually happens. When you talk about culturally relevant curricula, we have a very narrow view on what we teach students. It should be a wider view, because everybody has a right to know about their history. Everybody has a right to know how they played a part in this country, the things that were positive and the things that were negative on all sides. I've heard a lot of people talking about critical race theory, about how it teaches students this or it teaches students that. Nowhere in this statement do you see the words critical race theory. You don't, because they're not there. And that's okay if you don't believe it. What I know is I'm of mixed race. I don't support teaching my children hate. I don't support teaching any other children hate. That's why I'm on this board. It's because of the experiences I went through as a Prince William County student. the experiences my son went through as a Prince William County student, so that nobody has to go through those same things ever again. From the time that I got here as a student till as a parent, Dr. Waltz came on board, the changes have been in this direction. And this is the way that we should be continuing to move to benefit everybody, because kids are left out. Kids are left behind. That should not be the goal. We're not talking about lowering standards. There's no research that says you lower standards and people do better. There's only research that says you raise the bar and kids meet the need. That's what we're doing. We should be inclusive of everybody. Everyone should be able to have conversations, uncomfortable ones and comfortable ones, and feel safe to do that. That is what this statement is putting down in writing. That's the first step. Many of the questions that you have are exactly operational. Operations belongs to the superintendent, period. We have approval of certain things, but that is not as by state code. The equity movement is here to stay. It's at the federal level, it is at the state level, and it is now coming down to our local levels. We didn't make this up. We're doing what we need to do for our children, and that means all children. What we should be doing is educating each other, having these difficult conversations with each other, and not fighting each other. It's good to have disagreements. It's good to have discourse so you can learn. When you take a position, you stake it in the ground, and you have no intention of moving, there's no learning that occurs. The conversations aren't meant to change belief, it's for understanding. What we should be doing is having conversations so we can understand each other's positions, learn how to grow from them, and having these conversations with our children. Because when you talk about equity, it is the younger children who are moving this ball way faster than any of the adults. I know this because I've watched our student representatives speak on it, develop the seat, continue to grow it, fight and advocate for their needs. One of the things I'm most proud of being on the board is getting student representatives on the board who have carried this torch. We are behind them in this movement. We should be supporting the future, and that's what it's about, making sure that everyone learns, making sure that everyone is included, everyone feels safe, everyone learns about their history, and everyone is able to contribute. That is not equality. So I would hope that as this time moves forward, that we can have these conversations. I know that the new superintendent was involved in this. This has her input as well. And that when she comes on board, we have the operational conversations. This is step one, it's not the end. And this was not done in a silo either. I can't say enough that this came from our community. Average citizens, just like y'all, who participated on an advisory council, as well as administrators, as well as staff, as well as other professionals and students. This wasn't done in a vacuum. What I would like to see is more participation and more discussion for the benefit of everybody and less arguing, because it's not very helpful to anyone, especially our young people who are watching us. So I hope as this discussion moves forward, we do more equity work. We understand the current systems that we have in place, because we are already doing a lot of this. What we aren't doing is writing it down and making it real and permanent, as it should be. So I hope that
I didn't. I did not.
That's okay. I know it was the technical thing. But I do hope that, this board approves this statement, that as we move forward in the summer and in months to come, we have these discussions not only with the public, but the new superintendent. And as we enter into the new administration, I will continue to advocate for better communication, better understanding, and more communication between this board and the public at all points. And to be more proactive, so we don't run into situations like this moving forward.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. I'm going to go to Mr. Wilk, Ms. Jessie. I'm going to go through everyone first. Mr. Wilk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go through this kind of bit by bit on the agreement. I do also want to say one comment was made about how we're dismantling something that the superintendent has done. Although the superintendent and I have not agreed on everything, Dr. Walt's legacy is a legacy of extremely progressive, great educational things for this school system. This is a man who, at a time when people weren't willing to fund full-day kindergarten, pushed that at the very start of his term as superintendent. This is also the same man who led the charge to rename a building named after a seditionist Confederate general with one of the highest minority populations in the county. So again, where credit is due, I do want to thank you, Dr. Waltz, for some of the great things you brought to the school division. I haven't even touched on pre-K and the expansion of that and early childhood education and stuff like that and making equal opportunities for students. So I just wanted to highlight that. Going through some of the bullets and kind of breaking them down, and a couple things were not said. Ms. Williams said, I'm going to kind of try to give anecdotal evidence of this, of things we're already doing in this county. None of this to me is absolutely new, and I'll give some examples of this. And you know, when we were talking about the political ramifications, I wish we had some anecdotal. I'll give you an anecdotal. This year, I had a parent contact me saying that their child felt targeted because they were Trump supporters in a class relatively filled with kids of Biden supporters. Now, although I did not support President Trump, I do believe our kids deserve to be in a classroom where politics are not forced on our children from an educational standpoint. When I was a government teacher in this county, in Gainesville, one of the more conservative areas, I was able to keep my views so private that most of the kids at the end were so confused when they voted on what party I was. A lot of them said, by and large, Republican. So my point is, we're doing the right things. If you have the right advocate for you on the board who's not putting partisan politics at the forefront of their decision-making, all kids are protected. I can give other anecdotals of kids whose fathers or mothers are police officers. And as a rise of what is happening in this country, their students felt targeted. Again, I went to bat for those kids. Doesn't matter what my political beliefs are, that our goal is in schools to keep politics out of the classroom. So I wish we had some anecdotals there, but I just wanted to give some there. So if I look at bullet number 1, I just want to break this down: providing students and staff with access and resources, opportunity, supports, interventions to ensure they maximize their abilities. Yeah, I agree. Our number 1 priority should be maximizing the educational resources and benefits to all children. Providing all PWCS students and staff with resources and opportunities that align to their unique levels of need to meet their learning, health, and safety. Agreed. Again, our goal should be aligning staff and resources to help maximize all students' potentials and abilities. Although all students may not achieve the maximum level set by state and county academic standards, all students should have equal opportunity to succeed both academically and social and emotionally. High expectations and standards should apply across the school division and should be consistent with every school building program within Prince William County. Give an example anecdotally. We have middle schools where there's geometry teachers right in the building for the advanced math kids. But we have 3 middle schools off the Route 1 corridor where the kids have to be bused to a high school, taking valuable time out of instruction for those kids to get that same course. That's how I view that statement. Raising the achievement of all students while working to eliminate learning disparities. Again, agreed. We need to raise achievements of all students. However, we should continue and guarantee that programs implemented will be accessible for all students. As a county, we need to continue celebrating our successes and do everything in our ability to help those students who are struggling without eliminating advanced courses and higher learning classes for those who take those courses. Hence, the school board has made concerted effort to hire more school counselors, psychologists, and additional aides and support. Also, this board created a funding distribution plan to support schools with higher socioeconomically disadvantaged students to better aid principals with their building programs. This has already happened. This statement is not a change from our current practices and policies, just a statement of affirmation to continue the great work that is done. Assuring all PWCS staff members to examine and interrupt beliefs, implicit, explicit biases, policies, and or practices that perpetuate systematic racism and discrimination. So looking at this, like most companies where I'm employed, I believe our employees should continue taking courses as we have offered regarding cultural sensitivity. When I say that, this board, the previous board, not even this current members, but the last makeup of the previous board, voted to implement cultural sensitivity training for our teachers and staff. That is public. So feel free, contact the Office of Student Learning. Those courses are, from my understanding, run by University of Virginia modules that our teachers take in professional development. Now, I can tell you, my 4 years since the implementation of this, I have only received one teacher complaint in my district. Again, that's my district, that's anecdotal to me, but not representative of the entire county. So again, these courses are there currently right now. I would encourage you all to look into those and see what those are or what our teachers are learning right now. Engaging guardians, parents, guardians, community division, school programs to build connections, provide support, foster relationships, blah, blah, blah. Again, agreed. These are programs that our schools currently offer and will continue offering moving forward. Parent engagement is critical to a child's success. Given the advent of virtual platforms and instruction, our division should do everything possible to offer opportunities for parents to also join these events virtually. That's how I view that. Examining and revising our curricular and teaching practices to ensure that they are culturally relevant and representative of achievements of our diverse community to meet social academic needs and expectations of each student. Agreed. As a division, we work with teachers to better understand the student populations in which we serve. Our Office of Professional Development does an outstanding job providing teachers with courses to expand their knowledge and cultural competency. Per the encouragement of the Virginia Department of Education, our schools will provide offerings like African American history and other additional courses based on student demand. Cultural awareness is not politics. Our division recognizes these differences, and we as a division updated things like our school calendar and to incorporate courses that support cultural awareness and other topics. Again, this statement, despite rumors, does not adopt a critical race theory of curriculum, which I do not support. I do not support adopting critical race theory instruction for our students. Recruiting and retaining staff members who reflect rich diversity of our community. Again, these practices are all in place. We have already been doing things like this with our human resources offices. This statement is not bringing a change to our current practices. In a minority-majority community, we need to do our best to recruit and retain staff that reflects the cultural diversity of our students. We are already making concerted efforts to send recruiters to HBCs and their teacher fairs to recruit more diverse students. We are sending our team of administrators to teacher fairs all over the country to recruit diverse learners, not just based by race, but by their growth, where they were born and raised, and the different educational beliefs that they can bring to the school system. I was brought from Michigan, completely different philosophy and change of what I saw as educational instruction. I'm happy to be down here. I'm happy to be brought here and work with my colleagues, many of them who are born and raised in Virginia, like my wife. Preparing all students to succeed in a multicultural global society by teaching contributions and viewpoints of all people in culturally relevant curricula. Agreed. Studies show that employers feel that many students are not prepared for the workforce upon completing high school. In a Forbes article titled "Students Think They're Ready for Real World, Employers Not So Much," the article highlights how education needs to adjust and adapt to real-world curriculum for our students. The reality is, we are a multicultural and global society that needs to be incorporated into students' education. In another article from Insight into Diversity, cultural competency is highlighted as a key competency for future job recruiters. The article includes information on how companies are looking now more than ever to hire candidates with strong cultural competence. We need to continue preparing students for the real world that awaits them and show them the value of all races. There is no inherently evil race, and there is no curriculum in this country that validates any conspiracy that we will be educating our students to believe other races are better than others. Again, I will not be supporting any type of critical race theory that's brought before this board if that is part of the operational plan. I do support the equity statement as a beginning of a process of looking at other programs and resources for this school division. Thank you.
Ms. Jackson.
Thank you, Dr. Lateef. I just want to piggyback on what Mr. Wilkes was talking about, just to discuss my mindset as I evaluated the equity statement and my years in the classroom. We are doing much of this already. Discussing equity in the classroom is imperative to ensure that all students have access to a quality education. For example, when a child is identified as gifted, they receive gifted services. Then the county reviews the data for gifted services to ensure all demographics have access to screening or testing. The goal is to raise the level of achievement for all students. Discussing equity requires frequent, sometimes difficult conversations that should be modeled top-down. There's always room for improvement. Nobody and nothing is perfect. All school systems should be constantly reviewing data, and the public can access our data through the equity scorecard online, and they can see our strengths and our needs. Like, I think back in my years in the classroom, and I think about like when I was teaching like one-step equations. Many of my kids might understand what a variable is. Let's just say 75% of my class understood the definition of a variable, but 25% did not. I can't move on until everybody understands the definition of a variable. Understanding the definition of a variable is vital to one-step equations, which is connected to high school mathematics, and I, as an instructor, would need to identify and determine what roadblocks there were for all students in my class to understand the definition. So I might go back and maybe teach the root word, vary, or link the word to a home language, or maybe talk to a mentor teacher. At the same time, I would differentiate instruction to make sure that those who understood the definition of a variable could access to reach a higher level, maybe apply it outside to real-world instruction. Whatever you are doing in teaching, you're constantly assessing, adjusting, instructing, and repeating with purpose. We need our school leaders to do the same thing to ensure all students receive a world-class education in an environment where they feel safe. That is what this equity statement says. That is what this equity statement asks of us. Thank you.
You want to go? Ms. Zargarpur.
Thank you, Dr. Lateef. I might actually be the only person on this dais who has to take these trainings that you have referenced before. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Jackson has too. I have never had to report a bias or say anything publicly to another employee or a colleague in my building. All of my training is to help me understand how I am viewing my students and what is it maybe I need to do to meet their needs a little bit better. I'll give you a really simple example. I am a music teacher. Every year I do a lesson on Lunar New Year. I used to call it Chinese New Year, but the school I teach in has a very large population of students who come from different Asian countries. My first year I called it Chinese New Year. I picked a Chinese song. We did some things. It was great. And one of my kids raised her hand and said, "We do a similar thing in Korea." So the next year I added Korea, but before I added Korea, I made sure I talked to my students first and said, "Lunar New Year is coming up. I would like to know how your families celebrate it." And now I am able to more reflect those students in that lesson. And it changes every year. And I have learned more. Now that's a simple example, but that is one example. As someone who has been taking these trainings for several years now, I know that the state is going to start mandating these things. Prince William County is ahead of the curve. They are already training teachers. They are already making changes and providing the experiences and setting the tone for the things that the state is already coming behind us and saying you have to do. So we're in a good position. We're in a great position. We're leaders in it. So all of this, I know these words also, they bring up a lot for us, and that is also part of the conversation. As Ms. Williams said earlier, it's okay to be uncomfortable. We do have to have these conversations. I know I have made a huge journey myself. I will admit that. There's things that I had my own thoughts before, and it's changed. So I think this is worthy of conversation. It is just a start. Remember, we have asked some operational questions. Those are to come later. We also have things that we have to work on for the future, and these things should not be set in stone, but working documents, including this. This should be a working document, because if we find that we need to adjust for the betterment of our students, well, we should. And we should invite everybody in on that conversation. I will also add, I spoke to the person who sits on the committee who represents the Coles District, and she did mention that it might be helpful to have a really good conversation about what some of these terms mean in the context of our education system. So I will leave you with that. I am grateful for the work that they have done. I am welcome the conversation. So we should be having these conversations and continue this discussion. Thank you.
Ms. Jessie, you had a final comment?
Yes.
And then I'll go to Ms. Ralston afterwards.
Okay,
Ms.
thank
Jessie.
you. I'm going to disagree with a little bit of what's been said here because everyone says that Dr. Waltz does a wonderful job. But Dr. Waltz would also agree that there's more work to do and that there are disparities. If you want to know about access to dual enrollment, specialty programs, college readiness, access to gifted education, and specialty programs, read the strategic plan. Look at where, and this is out, if you go to page 17, and I shouldn't be talking to the audience, but I am because you're here. And I think you deserve to be talking, I'm sensitive to the citizens' comments, but go to page 17, and you'll see that there are disparities throughout the state, and there are disparities in Prince William County. And several times tonight, Dr. McDade has been mentioned. One of the reasons that I was one of the people who, in this whole board, selected her because she is a community input person. So in reviewing all of the equity statements, I also went to Chicago. And I thought, what did they do for equity? So they heard from over 3,000 voices in the city because that's who she is. They heard from students, hundreds of students. They didn't just meet with parent advisory councils. They met with groups of parents, thousands of them. It's a 5-year plan. She is going to be the person that's going to implement it. I want to reassure you that she is not the kind of person that's going to do something without input. She's a town hall kind of person. She's going to seek the input of all parents. Yes, there are problems in this county, and there are problems in the school system. There's problems throughout the nation. And so when when I was listening to Ms. Williams, she said, I am the most whatever equity. I've done this for 40 years. 40 years. I've seen kids learn that should not learn. Not only did they learn, but they learn at high levels. And when you've seen that, you cannot look away. And so whatever we need to do to get all of these kids, every one of them, I would like my goal, personal goal, is that every child in this system graduates and be either ready for college or ready for a career. That's what we need to do. Every one of them. Black, white, I don't care what color. It's all of our kids. And what I like about the equity statement is that it's all. But I do have to ask Mr. Iman if it's okay to add facilities in that statement. Can we get that? And I think the parents really do deserve to know our definition of equity. Can we provide that statement for parents? Not just a framework, but how do we define equity? Because equity versus, most people really don't know which, it's a scary kind of thing. You come and say you're going to do equity. And the other thing I noticed is that Dr. Madade and what they were doing, they talked about the why, the how, and what. And I think that maybe what's happening is that somehow we're giving parents the impression that they don't understand why we're doing it. And somehow that needs to be explained to them. And then the what and the authorization or the actualizing of this is going to be where the rubber's going to meet the road. And I assure you, I know this lady not that well, but from what she impressed all of us, because she is a hands-on person and she wants to hear from every single one of you. So I thank all of you for coming and sharing your input, and I will vote for this, but only if we agree that we would put, and the other thing that I didn't mention, because we didn't talk about the groups, one of the lowest performing groups are in special ed, access to, in our county, and we're above the state, but we still have a lot of work to do. And I don't say this to mean that I didn't think you did a good job, but we do have work to do, and I think that's why you supported the Equity Committee, because you know that there's still work to do. So with that, I'm voting, but only with those conditions. Is that okay, Mr. Iman?
Understood.
Miss, I had, Miss Ralston, did you have any comments?
Yeah, just a one or two. But I agree with all the people who believe that if you are fair and equal, then it's much better than not being fair and equal. When you live in that kind of spirit, you have to be real careful. As a African American woman, I've had a lot of trouble and talking with people and getting people to understand of who we are, which is no difference with who there are, just color. Thank you.
Ms. Wall?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Everybody supports equal access and equal opportunity for our students. We can all get behind, some of the statements that are in here that say, we need to provide resources, opportunities, supports, and interventions to ensure that students maximize their abilities and their potential. There's nothing wrong with that statement. It's a very appropriate statement. That we will provide students and staff with resources and opportunities that align to their unique levels of need. From the special ed student, the refugee, the gifted student, the student that's experienced trauma, and students who need acceleration. Students who are very bright but very disengaged. We can do all kinds of things, and we do things like that in Prince William County. We have great schools and great programs. We have diversity across our programs in our schools. We have wonderful specialty programs. We have amazing teachers and counselors and guidance counselors who really work hard to help children, to give them the opportunities that they need to succeed. And even raising, achievement of students and working to eliminate disparities. Yes, do kids come to school equally prepared? No. Can we help them? Yes. We can do everything possible to help them. Where I have issues with this statement is where we say things like we're going to assure people examine implicit and explicit bias. We assume that they have biases that are getting in the way of their education, of their teaching. We assume that we have policies and practices that are perpetuating systemic racism. We assume that we have these problems. I'm sorry, but I do not see a review, a study, evidence that we have systemic racism. Now, we may have inequalities, yes, because we have a limited pot of resources and we seek to allocate those resources to the best of our ability. Do we have the exact same programs at every school, in every classroom? No. Are we doing our very best to provide as many opportunities as possible? Yes. Do we provide math instruction, reading instruction, support in science and art and PE and everything else? Yes. It's not always going to be exactly the same, but we do an excellent job. And so I have an issue with saying or assuming facts not in evidence. If we can prove it, okay, but we can't just assume that we have that we have perpetuated systemic racism without doing due diligence. I love that we are engaging parents and guardians in the community in our programs and building connections and providing support because parents are essential. We cannot shut parents out of this dialogue. We can't put upon our students and put upon our parents doctrines and ideologies that they have not had a say in. And we can't, I don't think it's enough to say, just trust us. We're gonna do it right. If we're going to pass something, we need to give parents a way, at least if we can't say what it is that we're going to be doing, we need to at least provide a way that they can be a part of the dialogue and not have something put upon them without their input. I think it's really important that we recognize we need the consent of the governed. We represent. We are not knowledgeable in everything, but we represent the people. You put us here and we listen to you. And as we examine and revise our curricular and teaching practices, if we're going to improve our teaching practices, great. That's wonderful. But if we're going to start down a path of indoctrination, or if we're going to start down a path of methodology that seeks to pit children against one another because of their race, no, that's not okay. And I think most parents would say, I don't want that. I don't want that in my home. I don't want my child being taught that. Now, diversity is great. We have, at some of our schools, we have students from 35 different countries. One of my schools is like that. Kids from all over the world. And we can celebrate that in appropriate ways. But when we get down to basic instruction of math, science, language arts, reading, we need to be providing a very solid, equal type of instruction. and giving them the basics so that they can accomplish their academic goals, and we can have those high expectations for every student. We shouldn't be holding anybody back. We should be accelerating everybody to the maximum amount possible. I have some issues with the idea that we would retain and recruit based on race. It looks to me like that bullet point is talking about that. Do we want diversity in our teaching force? Absolutely. But it should not be, we should not run afoul of our civil rights laws. We have those civil rights laws for a reason. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 says you cannot hire based on discriminatory practices such as sex or origin, national origin or race or ethnic origin or anything else. You can't do that. We already have those laws, so I'm not really sure what we're saying here. Are we going to be looking to hire people based on race? I think we might have a problem if we're, doing that only if that's one of our main criteria. We need to look for the best teachers possible. I agree with that. We need to look for great teachers, and we have great teachers. And if we have teachers that are struggling, we need to have training that helps them be more successful teachers. And I agree, we do live in a multicultural global society where we teach the contributions and viewpoints of all people. Obviously, we can't teach the viewpoints of every single person or every single culture. We would never get through it. I took many, I have a degree in humanities, and I took many history classes, world history classes, Asian history, humanities classes, etc., Islamic history classes. It would take you a lifetime to study all the contributions of everybody. What our students need are the basics to help them succeed in an ever-changing workforce. They need more STEM education. They need mathematics that is at a very high level. We need science education that's a very high level. We need technology education, those kinds of things. Those are the things that are going to make a difference for our graduates as they go out and they seek higher education and they seek high levels of employment. They become productive citizens and contribute and give back. That's the kind of thing that we're doing. I don't know if this equity statement will accomplish that or not, but what I fear is some of the concerns that were raised today, that parents are concerned about fairness, equity, merit. They're concerned about civil rights. They're concerned about freedom of speech. They're concerned about the introduction of destructive political ideology and accompanying methodology, because friends, that's happening. That's happening in other places. In our neighboring jurisdictions, in places like California, there's evidence of what is happening along those lines. I hope we don't go down that road in Prince William County. I will fight that if we do. I agree with Mr. Wilk. I will fight the introduction of critical race theory, methodology, and ideology into our schools because I think it's harmful. I think it's divisive. I think it pits children against each other, and it puts an inordinate emphasis on race, and I think we should get away from that. Instead, we should look at achievement and learning and equality of opportunity. I just think we have a lot of work to do. I don't think this is quite ready yet. I think we have a lot of questions. I think the public has raised a lot of questions. I would like to continue having dialogues on this. I believe that the public has a right to answers, and I hope that we can find answers for them to their satisfaction.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you all.
Mr. Chairman?
Ms. Williams.
I'd just like my second. That's
It's
okay.
not a debate, though. Remember.
No. So I'm not here to debate. I just want to start by saying I respect everybody's right to have their own opinion and to stand firm in their position because that's part of what it's all about. What I do want to say is, equity. Equity means that things are fair. Equality means that things are the same. That's actually the definition. You can look it up. That's what's stated there. I'm not going to debate it because I didn't write the definition. It's there for everyone to see. When you talk about discrimination and you talk about racism, they aren't interchangeable. It's not the same thing. You can discriminate on a bunch of things. Racism is different. And when you talk about, as Ms. Wall was saying about studying humanities and history, do you know what it's like to grow up in an American education system and not learn about your people's contribution to this country? Yep. Because that's what we're talking about adding. Not talking about taking away. You're talking about adding. When you're a person of color, children do what they see. So when you grow up in a world and you don't have people around you who are successful that look like you, you're less likely and inclined to believe that you can do it too. There's studies about that. I'm not making this up. You're free to look it up for yourself. When you talk about you're not sure if there's systemic racism, there's plenty of documented data and evidence. Happy to discuss with anyone afterwards. What I'm not going to sit here and do is not stand up for my position and not speak my truth and what I know and what research has shown for me, and just let one side continue to push rhetoric that I disagree with. I think that you should speak it, but every time it's spoken, I'm going to speak up for the other side, because that's what we're supposed to be doing. That is fair. Yep. It's not equal, but it's fair, which is equality. And that is the point. We don't have to believe the same things, but I'm not going to not speak my truth. I'm not going to not speak and show the data that says that these things are real, because they are. It's not about, for me, it's why I agree. It's not from the research that I know, from the studies that I've been in, that says that these things don't exist. Part of systemic racism is the policies and things that are in writing that have existed since time. We're not talking about individual racism, although that plays a factor. We're not talking about individual discrimination, although that plays a factor. When you talk about these things, we're talking about as a system, and it is that way. If it wasn't, then we wouldn't have had Brown versus Board of Education. If it isn't, we wouldn't have disparities now between certain ends of the county or certain schools having more resources than others because of outside influences or whatever the case may be. Those are real things. When my son went to compete in a culinary competition, there were 50 other schools in the nation that went to compete. His school was more concerned about beating another Prince William County school because that school came with nice book bags and t-shirts and matching shirts and all of these things. In his school, they had to work during lunch, breakfast, dinner, after school to be able to afford to go. They didn't come with matching anything. What's fair is that they all had the chance to go. Equality would be if they all had the appropriate resources to go, which they didn't. That's important. It does make a difference when you look out and you see people who look like you, talk like you. Doesn't mean that they get the job just because. You also have to have the credentials to match. We didn't change the name of a middle school because it didn't make a difference. We changed it because it made a difference, because it is important. You have to have things in writing. When you don't, things can go any which way you want them to go. There's nothing that unifies, there's nothing to hold you accountable, there's nothing to acknowledge what is or what isn't. What we are doing, part of what we are doing, is changing the what was into what our kids are asking us, which is for everyone to be represented, everyone's voice to be heard, and to be able to do the things to allow them to excel. Beliefs are debatable. Positions are debatable. Data that we have that says these things are in existence because it's been recorded for decades is real. There are more students of color, all colors, who encounter disciplinary actions in this state. That's why there's a thing called the school to prison pipeline. It's not just black kids. In certain schools, it's Asian children. In certain schools, it's white children. In certain schools, it's black children. What it should be is children who need discipline, not just because of people's beliefs or the way the system is designed. When you talk about implicit biases and biases, if you deal with a child whose family, it's more likely that their family yells and that's how they communicate and they come into school, and in your mind you think yelling is a negative thing, what are you going to think when you interact with that child if you don't understand that other people interact differently in their homes? How are you going to interact? You won't know. You're not prepared. So these are the kinds of things that we're talking about. Hold on. Sorry, I don't mean to be rude. Just passionate. I just think that what we should be doing is conversating and learning, not just from the data and the research that's real, but from talking to each other and understanding that these differences are big. They impact how we interact with each other and we should be more knowledgeable. But absolutely, we can't solve these problems or even go down this road if we don't have a starting point. And we need to have a starting point across the division. And that's what we're doing. And when we talk about operational things, I hope that we have more conversations. It would be nice to have town halls and not screaming matches, but actual conversations. Because our kids are always watching. And they absolutely deserve to see us model behavior that we ask of them, which is to be respectful and mindful of others. So, thank you.
Miss Caroline Silvera, our student rep, has something to say. Caroline.
Okay, so I'd like to just start by saying that I'm not a voting member of the board. The power that I hold is in my voice. So I'm just going to give a student experience of how equity has helped students this past November, October. So the county gave a free SAT day for all seniors. And while this was offered to all seniors, it was developed with an equity mindset. So equity is not necessarily just a tangible thing or things that you give to somebody, it's also a way of thinking. So not only did we get free SATs, which SATs are about $70, but they also made sure that we had transportation if we needed it, bus transportation, and food. So me personally, I have my own car, and I have food to eat at home, so I didn't have to worry about any of that. But the county also recognized that there are kids who may not eat breakfast some days because they don't have food in their house, or their parents are working, they don't have a car, and they need to get to this SAT. So I just wanted to give an example because equity is not necessarily always, only low-income kids can go to this free SAT day. It's everybody can come, but we understand that some people have different backgrounds, and they might not be able to make it if we don't give them buses. And I think that personally that day helped a lot of students, and that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Ms. Silvera. Please vote. Ms. Ralston, how do you vote?
Yes.
Ms. Ralston votes yes.
The vote is 7 yes, 1 no. Mrs. Wall, motion passed.
Moving on next to, what is that? Is that it? Board matters. We'll start with Mr.